Welcome classic rock fans to an episode of Classic Album Review, where classic albums are excavated and explored. And today, for my Patreon exclusive for this month, we're looking at XTC's Skylarking. The writer Henry James said the two words summer afternoon are the two most beautiful words in the English language. And this album, this pastoral epiphany, is imbued with pathos and sadness in equal measure. It does feel inherently retrospective, which is probably the point really, considering it's an album that's looking at how time is effectively a rather slippery construct. It certainly does at times feel like a bit of Beatlesque chamber pop baroque revival. Obviously it focuses on the hazy unravelling of a day. It reminds me a little bit of the Moody Blues days of Future Past, philosophically at least anyway. And I love the minutiae, the day or every moment seeing as a kind of a microcosmic in the universal, grand universal scheme of things. It's philosophically quite profound really, if you think about all of our lives are just made up of these tiny little moments, this little minutiae, which seem rather insignificant to us, but obviously are not, as we all shuffle towards the grave. Nick Cave, and I'm a huge fan by the way, wrote that a star is just a memory of a star, and we are fireflies pulsing dimly in the dark. But nevertheless, this album is a strange one, of course, made even more profound by those beautiful atmospherics that a producer like Todd Rundgren brings to the project. It has a profound depth, and its lulling, pastoral tones very much belie the dark existential message that forms the foundations of this one. If the natural world, of course, is used as a symbol of permanence, it only tends to emphasise our own impermanence. As I said, this album cleverly reconstructs the idea of time passing, the diurnal round, 24 hours a day, a life perhaps. We're never really sure. And of course it beautifully references all the textures from the best of 60s pop, those psychedelic affectations, which again is very much part of the idea of the album, the idea of time being a bit of a movable feast really. This is a masterpiece, a baroque and ethereally textured collection. And the way it scrutinises a day's unfolding slowly and stealthily. Gosh, it's no wonder that Rolling Stone called them the ninjas of the mundane. This pastoral symphony is very much based on their Wiltshire upbringing. Now, Wiltshire wasn't far from my own upbringing, which was Berkshire, of course. But this album was recorded at Woodstock, Todd Rundgren's home in Woodstock, which might have done a lot to imbue the overall atmosphere and that sense of longing, homesickness perhaps. But certainly that evocation of meadows and hillside drowse is certainly apparent here, as youthful dreams and fumbles seem to be looked at from afar, often embellished and formulated for a symbol of motifs and themes, of course, and these wonderful atmospherics, as I've said, that Todd Rundgren brings to the project. Although it has to be said, despite summer being a kind of a motif on this album, the atmosphere in the studio was considerably frosty. The French existentialist philosopher Albert Camus said that in the depth of winter I finally learned that there was in me an invincible summer. And in this case I'd have to say just as well. But XTC are a rather odd band with their own very much distinctive take on punk and post-punk, metamorphosising into the jangly, crisp pop of new wave. But eventually Partridge succumbs to Valium addiction, starts suffering pre-show panic attacks, and decides to become a studio band, a decision that did not go down well with the band's drummer Terry Chambers, of course, who I think left. But interestingly, it's almost as if they're following in the footsteps of people like Brian Wilson and the Beatles from sort of 67 onwards. Maybe that in some way informs the very retrospective feel homage of this album. Now, Wikipedia described this as a loose concept album. And we get this idea of a day, a long, continuous moment passing, and that's perhaps also emphasised by the wonderful segueing we get into some of the songs. For example, Summer's Cauldron into Grass, and Ballet for a Rainy Day, and 1000 Umbrellas. I particularly like the album's opener, Summer's Cauldron. It has a drunk, almost woozy aesthetic to it. Perhaps too much of that Wiltshire cider, I guess. But it certainly represents wonderful moments of production nous, I think, and part homage, part pop baroque. It's almost like the Beach Boys meet Stravinsky. And the way the album just unfolds with each song before reaching its final denouement in Sacrificial Bonfire. This band are best known amongst that collective unconscious populace for that hit Sensors Working Overtime. I distinctly remember, I think, seeing them on Top of the Pops in their very 80s chino trousers, I guess, grooving away to that one. But interesting how they've developed as well. I think the last release, and we know of the Murmur, the Big Express, but it was the Dukes of Stratosphere that did rather well for them, and also started to explore those psychedelic textures that are scrutinised in even more detail on this album. I think it's fair to say that this album feels like a homage to 1960s pop, and that's reflected in the studio trickery employed, as well as the instrumentation, including the use of a mellotron at one point, which absolutely delights me. But some of the albums that came out before Skylarking were almost sonically foreshadowing the direction this band were going to take. The writing was very much on the wall, so to speak. In fact, the critic A.D. Amorosi said, "This album is more lyrically mature, lush and gently psychedelic than anything before in their catalogue. Skylarking borrowed the hilly, holy feel of Murmur, as well as the ringing Beatles-ish vibe from the Big Express, but with a softly sweeping gracefulness and a finessed orchestral swirl." It's probably unpopular to say this amongst hardcore XTC fans, but I tend to emphasise Todd Rundgren's contribution to this album, that acid, frazzled Philadelphian. I think a lot could be attributed to his idea of how things should be sequenced and how things should sound, which is what a good producer should do. His production now is certainly apparent here in everything from the chirping crickets to the hum of pylons. There's certainly this as a conceptual idea, a concept album is a perfect vehicle to bring together all those threads of, the pastoral tunes, poetry and pop anthems on a project, of course, whose provisional title was Day Passes. Todd Rundgren said of this project, "It could be about a day, a year or a lifetime. There were songs that represented significant milestones along the way: birth, young love, family, labour, illness, death, sprinkled with moments of wonderment. Using this framework, I came up with a sequence of songs and a justification for their placement and brought it to the band." The record company apparently chose him as a producer because he had a reputation for not only delivering projects on time, but delivering projects under budget as well, which is always going to appeal. Well, that's not to say he didn't do some basic groundwork. Apparently he saw the band live, I think a couple of times in Chicago. In terms of the concept and style, of course, the album, as I've said, looks at the detailed mapping of a day, and it's how it can be significantly transposed as regards the significant mapping of a life. In the minutiae, infinity in a grain of sand, I think William Blake famously wrote. But this series of back garden symphonies, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all, the season cycle, the album's opener, summer's cauldron, these pastorals merge and swirl within the imagination of the listener. Of course, it reminds me a little bit of a Turner painting, an impressionistic haze of colour. Consequently, we get an album that feels evergreen, a recurring, perennial experience reflected in this music, which of course I think is the whole point, like life is in some interminable loop. And it's apparent in some of the textures they merge from Celtic folk to a new wave, very much a new wave feel, as well superimposed upon 1960s British psychedelic pop. Patron just said that this album in part is supposed to evoke a sense of a playfully sexual hot summer. It's just about summer and being out in the open and discovering sex in a stumbly teenage way, which is always the best way to discover sex, I think. But the path to the excellence that is this album was certainly littered with lots of stumbling and fumbling moments, no doubt spearheaded by the very fraught relationship between Partridge and Rundgren, of course. Interestingly, according to Pitchfork, if I may quote, Rundgren's appointment brings together two brilliant but doomed minds. From the Anglophile producer and the songsmith Andy Partridge, there were 1,000 common interests, but one great chasm that would subsume egos and tear up studio floorboards. It descends to such a level that the band actually used to play the Munsters theme whenever he entered the studio. As far as they were concerned, he resembled Herman Munster. I think they even called him Old Banana Fingers as well, due to his clumsiness on the keyboards. So let's think about the songs on this record. It starts with Summer's Cauldron, of course. You get that atmospheric chirp of crickets merging with the swelling music and what sounds like an oboe at one point. It's just absolutely remarkable. And the vocals are layered over this cacophonous snap of summer. I love the use of personification. I think the trees are described as drunk with nectar. It feeds into that mystic and almost poetical quality of this number. It has a beautiful droning quality. I particularly like the eastern textures employed around about sort of 2 minutes 30 into this number. A lot of those atmospherics, of course, are, as I've said, have to be credited to perhaps Todd Rundgren's influence. He even plays melodica, I think. Described by one critic as sounding like a smear of sunlight across the horizon. Of course, we get, and then we get that very pronounced crooning of Partridge. Then the drum comes in like a heartbeat, a slow pulsing throb, very much like a summer's day itself. Love the organ sound on this. Apparently the organ sound is reminiscent of the Beatles' Blue Jay Way. All the ingredients here are on this album, from, you know, from heartbreak, infatuation, marriage, temptation, God, and of course dying. And the swell of the music, which almost suggests a very English serene hysteria, all contained within the paradigms of these spectacular arrangements. We get Grass. Now, Grass has a very Syd Barrett feel to it. And tonally, it's fascinating as well, use of the open E tuning and the chord shapes, which are supposed to emulate Thunderclap Newman's Something in the Air. It has a very suggestive quality as well, certainly apparent in the use of verbs like to tumble and to fumble, feeding into that very English predilection for euphemistic language. Then we get Meeting Place, another song that reminds me very much of Barrett-era Floyd. You know, built around this beautiful circular guitar motif, which like those early Barrett numbers, gives it that nursery rhyme quality to it. Reminds me a little bit of the Beach Boys. Wouldn't it be nice the way that guitar sounds like a child's toy? The industrial noises on this were actually sampled from a Fairlight, something that Kate Bush made excellent use of on her Never Forever album. They even employed the sound of the hooter from Swindon Works. I mean, the Meeting Place becomes part of that daily ritual of work, where it all coagulate around this common endeavour to earn a living, often doing something we just didn't want to do. And the sounds employed in this number, the clicks and whirls of industrialised production, and often the production line can often be employed as a pretty effective metaphor for the droning, mundane quality of life, an unremarkable life at that. That's really super good. Of course, it's making reference to the DC Comics superhero, and it's supposed to reference lots of relationships that Partridge had had during his past. Women who had better things to do than be around me, he says. Of course, it makes use of that Superman iconography. It references, I think, Kryptonite and the Fortress of Solitude. This song was initially rejected by the band, but it was salvaged by Todd Rundgren, who gave it a very 60s fairground feel to it, and it really adds to this number. I couldn't imagine listening to this album without this song. Then we get Ballet for a Rainy Day, which is another remarkable piece. I love the piano on this, those slightly psychedelic phrasings we get apparent in the discordant jangle of the notes. It almost veers towards vaudevillian pomp at some point, as it perfectly portraits a rainy day in an English town. 1000 Umbrellas has a very 60s feel to it, a beautiful piece of soundscape, and of course evoked as well in the lyrical reference to in floating downstream. It does have a chamber music quality to it, there's no doubt about that. One might say even reminiscent of Eleanor Rigby. And it certainly evokes a sense of melodrama, very much like Eleanor Rigby, in fact. Dave Gregory said that it was a rather doomy, miserable little thing with all those descending chromatic chords, and I thought, oh dear, how can I cheer this miserable song up? Then we get Season Cycle, that switcheroo from the Beatles to the Beach Boys in one fell swoop. Only Enough for Us is one of my favourites on this album. It has a real power pop feel to it, about the days spent working in a paint shop, I believe. There was some dispute, I think, between Moulding and Partridge over the bass line in this. Partridge, I think, felt that it was way too bluesy. Big Day is a song about marriage dedicated to Moulding's son. In fact, the term Big Day is often used as a reference to one's wedding day here in the UK. Another satellite, great samba beat on this one, punctuated by the big sounding wash of guitar. Apparently the song is about Erica Wexler, a fan that caused Partridge some difficulties or put some strain on his marriage. Partridge later said that he regretted some of the hurtful things he said in this song. Mermaid Smile, I love the gorgeous acoustic flourish at the beginning of this one. It's almost like Ravi Shankar meets Miles Davis. It's a rather jazz-infused number about childhood. It's specifically a board game, to be precise. There's a song about getting back in touch with your inner child, and I suppose the mermaid in many ways represents something elusive, intangible. And of course that's driven home, I think, by some of the tones employed in this song with that very aquatic sounding guitar riff. The man who sailed around his soul, what a beautiful image that is. Lovely jazzy feel of a backdrop of flute and finger clicks. Almost has something of the Scott Walker to this one. Pitchfork writes of this song: "In the wonderland of Skylarking, where Moulding's bucolic songs are right at home, it is partridges bedecked in half-drunk keys and Vegas suave that astonish." Of course, the melody of this one, the melody is inspired by Nat King Cole's version of Nature Boy probably from about 1949, I think. Dear God, one of my favourites on this album. I love the acoustic guitar and that wonderful use of that angelic voice. But it's an interesting narrative, really, a song that tells the story of a struggling agnostic with the idea of God and non-existence. Dying is quite another profound number, actually inspired by a neighbour of Moulding's named Bertie, who passed away. It was assumed, of course, it was about his father, but it wasn't. Then the whole album is rounded off with the wonderful Sacrificial Bonfire. Apparently Todd Rundgren contributed the string arrangements for this one, and Moulding said that he had not envisaged that. It made for the last 2 bars of the album more optimistic, which I think fitted into the original Day Passes concept. It was the dawn of another day. Partridge, of course, concurs with this point. I mean, he himself said that it was a good ending to the album, fading deep into the night, just leaves you in blackness with the slightest hint that dawn is coming. As I said at the beginning, a star is just the memory of a star. This is a remarkable album, really. It's like a merging of a H.E. Bates novel with a Talking Heads album. I really enjoyed the way it unfolds. I specifically enjoyed the textures and the sequencing on this record. It just leaves me to say thank you for watching. Please do stay safe, but more importantly, please do keep listening.